Hello again and welcome back to our podcast. We're speaking with Aisha again, Aisha Aati, our therapist. And this week we're going to be talking about marriage, expectation versus reality. So, Aisha, marriage is a big topic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially given sort of the work you do and the work that we do. So, in terms of marriage, do you think that there's been a shift from in terms of looking at how marriage is viewed? Is it seen differently to how maybe say 10 years ago?
Oh yeah, I think there's been a massive shift, and you can see that with people that are a lot younger than me now in their kind of 20s and how they view marriage.
Yeah.
And also how they're kind of finding partners as well, or looking for partners. It's totally different. It's a totally different game to when I was in my 20s. I think there's much more avenue for different ways of finding a partner or looking for someone who's a potential,
absolutely.
potential suitor.
Yeah.
So,
do you think? Everyone says to me as a divorce lawyer, "Oh, don't you think people aren't taking marriage very seriously these days? They seem to be like divorcing at the drop of a hat." And to be honest, I can't actually agree with that fully because I've always been in sort of doing this job and I only obviously see the rough end of it, when it all goes wrong. But generally, it's sort of, if I look at the community that I live in, there are issues around marriage. In fact, I will say that maybe people don't want to work as hard at trying to keep it together when it goes wrong. So from when I was in my 20s, you didn't hear much about divorce, and that may not be because there weren't problems in the marriage. It may well be because they wanted to keep the respect or, the taboo that was associated with divorce or separation. But I did feel that people tended to try and work a bit harder in terms of keeping their marriage together.
Yeah, I think I do agree with that. But I think when you were younger, there were a lot of cultural influence as well, sort of like the unsaid things about, sticking at it.
Yeah.
And just getting on with it. And, even if things are bad, it's for,
That's very true, actually. Very, very true, yeah.
This is your marriage and you just need to get on with it. I think that's changed a lot. I think we've moved away from kind of enduring and being martyrs for family and having that sense of kind of being a sacrificial lamb for the family to an individual identity now, to the point where there's less of the responsibility that you have towards the family, but more individualistic. So it's about you, and I think that's changed generationally a lot. And I think that's that's a lot of influence from the media and Instagram and things like that. I think there's just a really different kind of vibe now with
I do remember actually when I started off as a trainee solicitor, and I had a lady that came to see me, and she was a victim of domestic abuse, unfortunately. She had a lot of issues around her husband, and it was actual physical abuse. And nowadays we have terms of emotional abuse, financial abuse, coercion and control, but I remember this was actual beatings, and she approached the women in her family, I think it was her mothers, her aunties, all those kind of people, to tell them that this is what she was going through. And I just remember her words, and just something you said just reminded me that they told her, they said, "Sehle," right? That means put up with it.
Yeah.
Because it was, like you said, an unsaid expectation that you just have to put up with it. And I think you're right in that we are getting lots of information, or that generation, actually all generations are getting information, whether it's through media, through TV, through these dramas that everybody's watching. Because I think some of the dramas that I've been told about, especially the Pakistani dramas, they are dealing with these kind of taboo subjects, aren't they?
Yeah. I watch my parents watch these dramas, and
Yeah.
they're quite, you know, they're quite modern.
Yeah.
And they're not the backwards way of thinking in terms of, you know, women just need to shut up and put up, and this is your marriage.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because you saying about the lady that you knew, the DV victim, it just took me back to a childhood memory of being very young. So I was quite young, still living with the family, obviously. And I remember someone came to our house to live with us, and she had a small child, and she was a relative of one of my auntie's relatives. And she was hiding from her husband, and there was this
over at your place.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So and she you know, and I remember like we had like little police alarms and stuff put into the house in case her husband turned up. So it was quite serious, but I was quite young. I was you know, still sharing a room with my little sisters. So, but I do remember the seriousness of it, and I remember all this stuff, we going through all this stuff, all this protocol that we got told, if anyone comes, don't let anyone in, these are the alarms, you know, kind of watching out for her. And then a few months later, I remember her husband's family coming and taking her. She decided to go back. And it's just brought a flashback to that now. That, oh my God, I remember that. And I remember her family as well, putting pressure on and saying, oh, well, it's your husband, in it. These things happen. You know, between husband and wife, these things happen. It's fine, you know. Don't do the families basically, don't bring shame on them. Just, you can sort things out as husband and wife. You know, and it was kind of, but I remember my parents taking it really seriously and being really mindful of what she's going through, and you know, letting this stranger into our home. Yes, she was a family member of another family member, but we didn't really know her, but my parents, you know, opened their home up to her, you know, and we were all kids. I remember being a kid, like I said, I was still sharing a room with my sisters, but you know, it took me back to that she went back under coercion and that same kind of.
And did you ever hear what happened? Did they reconcile, you know, for good, or?
I think she did live with him for a few years. I think she did live with him. She went back and she did live with him for a few years, and I think they had more children. And I don't know the outcome.
It's that whole thing, and I've heard it so many times from, you know, women that will come and seek advice from us in that, what would I do if I separated or divorced? How would I earn an income? How would I look after the children? My children will suffer. They'll have trauma from being in a separated family. And I've heard that so many times, and I think it's that conditioning that you won't be able to aspire to anything if you end up separating or leaving your husband. So a lot of, you know, women think that that's the better of two evils, I suppose, for want of a better word.
And that thinking's generational, isn't it? It's generational because it comes from like, you know, layers and layers of family kind of feelings and thoughts and a culture, a subculture within that family and the community. That, you know, this is not the right thing to do. This is not the done thing. So we can't leave. But if one person broke that and said, no, you leave. You know, because my mum's always said, if you're not happy and you're being hurt or you're upset, you come here, you come back to me. Because and even my dad, he's very, you know, clear about that with us, that never ever put yourself at risk. We're always here. The doors are always open. There's nothing he can't come and tell us. So for me, having that is so important. And you can imagine the generations of men and women that had never had that and just carried on, just, you know, getting on with it. And even in domestic abuse situations, like I was explaining, you end up leaving and then going back. And, you know, I've seen my own aunties go through really horrific situations, but carried on because we don't do divorce in our family. We don't. It's just not the done thing. You know, that's what I heard growing up, and I've never judged it, Because I just think, like I said, I think it's, you know, it's a generational thing and it's being passed down, hasn't it?
Why do you think that is then for those who, I mean, okay, if we're looking at today's day and age, there's lots of support around. There's more awareness. So people like your family, your parents, there seem to be more people speaking about not acceptance of those kind of, you know, situations of violence. There is more support out there for women and for men who are victims of domestic abuse. What is it that pulls them back into, you know, destructive marriages?
I think there's lots of things. I think I was reading this article the other day and we were talking about big expensive weddings. And actually, if you look at it now, it's a real big, like you see all these weddings on Instagram. I was looking at it the other day and these lavish weddings. And they're like literally Bollywood style weddings, you know, they're absolutely amazing.
They're modelled upon those scenes in Bollywood. And I think they're exact replicas, aren't they?
Absolutely.
The dress and the makeup, the dancing, you know.
And I was like, no, stop it. You know, but I just thought that is the reality. You watch all these weddings and there's so much money invested in them. And so much expectation that, you know, it's hard to pull yourself out of that with a year down the line, 2 years down the line, even a few months down the line, things are not what you thought because expectation versus reality is totally different.
That's true.
You know,
I excuse me, for one of our podcasts, we interviewed a makeup artist, and she was telling us, you know, a very similar story to what you're just saying, in that she gets to see the brides firsthand because she's, you know, making them up for their big day. And she said that the stories that she hears, the amount of expense, the loans that are taken out to fund these weddings, you know, not just by the family themselves, who often are of modest means, but have to put on a show. And then there's the extended family that are taking out loans to do their bit, to, you know, to hire the vehicles, you know, the Lamborghinis that you see driving through the city, or you know, 5 or 6 of them, all different colours with the smoke flares. And some of these women, the marriages don't work. And she was telling me particularly about one lady who's on her 3rd marriage, and she was getting her ready for her wedding. And she was telling her that, you know, I'm still paying off the loans from the 1st marriage. You know, and it's a massive burden. And so this glamorizing of, now weddings and marriage is different. We know that, don't we?
Of course.
But where do you think this whole glamorizing, I know you said there's Bollywood, but we've got social media, I suppose, now. Where's the disconnect between the actual wedding and the whole performance and the whole show to the actual marriage itself? Is there a disconnect?
I think there can be a big disconnect when you're kind of getting these big ideas for these big weddings. You can get, you know, railroaded into a fantasy, you know, and you're just thinking about this big wedding and, you know, the basics of actually what is this marriage going to entail, you know, that kind of
hard work.
The hard work, you know, the basic stuff, you know, the basic things on a day-to-day basis. And when the honeymoon period's over, has anyone actually talked to this couple, or have they talked to each other about what their expectations are, what they need from each other, what are their families going to be like with each other? Because obviously with Asian families, we have big extended families, so you're not just marrying the person,
you marry the whole family.
You literally marry the whole family, and I've seen that with my own siblings, and an extended family. You know, it's not just my sister got married a few months ago, and you know we've gained an extra family, and it's like it's about getting to know them as well, and bringing them into our fold, and us kind of accepting how they work, and we're very different, but it's about people not being clear about what they want from marriage or what they expect.
That's what I'm really interested to hear from you. Through your work, where do you see the breakdown? Is it the communication? Is it the expectation of not having those important discussions beforehand? Where do you see the sort of start, I suppose, as it were, of the issues?
I mean, there's so many different kind of angles of it, but one thing for me that really stands out is communication and lack of emotional literacy and emotional intelligence. And I think when you're younger... Explain
that to us. Explain emotional literacy.
So having emotional intelligence is basically being able to communicate in a way where if you feel an emotion, there's a way that you can explain that and express that. Okay. So some people might be upset and just get really angry and shout, but actually having emotional intelligence is recognizing that emotion within yourself, and being able to express that to someone else as well and to yourself in a way that's not, it's not aggressive. It's inclusive, and it's explaining how you're feeling, and also in a way role modeling behaviour as well. Like, how can I tell you that I'm upset without going quiet?
Yeah,
because I've seen that,
too,
and that's a massive issue where
you can't articulate what you're actually feeling and going through, and it just stews inside you, I think, for want of a better word, and comes out in a way that it shouldn't really, I suppose, and makes things a lot worse.
And sometimes it don't come out at all. I've worked with some couples, or one half of the couple, where they've not had the communication from the other side, and I've said, well, what was your part in that? Well, why should I say that? They should know.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I see that a lot in
they should
couples.
Know, yeah.
Well, he should know what I wanted, and she should know.
Yeah.
And it's about understanding that actually without communication, none of us are mind readers. And there's, even when a marriage breaks down, we've all got a part in it.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, it's all an interaction. Everything we do is transactional. And even though someone might have done something really difficult, really wrong, what was our part in that? What could we have done to either help ourselves earlier, or recognize something earlier, or actually make things, easier in that transaction. And again, it comes down to communication and not being able to communicate your needs, and sometimes not even knowing what you need going into something, especially like I've seen like 21-year-olds, 23-year-olds, getting married now. And I'm like, wow, that for me, that's young.
We've seen that. Honestly, we've seen that as a trend. We get a phone call, a few times a week from very, very young husbands or wives, and we're in disbelief as to they've already got, a couple of children by that time as well.
But emotionally, they're not developed. They don't have that self-awareness.
Yeah.
They don't have the emotional intelligence to have communication with each other, to be able to manage the other person's stress in a way that they're able to be okay even when that other person's not okay. So that's
a good point.
And it's difficult, that is, when you can't manage your own emotions. If someone else, you're anchored to that person in a marriage, if they're not okay, all of a sudden you're not okay. All of a sudden,
very interesting,
things are becoming dysfunctional because, one part of that dynamic is not well, and the other part does not know how to manage without that.
Yeah.
Or has got an expectation, for that person to be able to provide or to do something.
And do you think, I've noticed a trend as well, and I know it's something we've discussed previously, but in terms of the sort of the Muslim community, if I take that as an example, we have quite a few clients from that community. There seems to be a trend towards younger marriages because they don't want to date. They want to keep it all halal. And so they get married quite early on, like you say, without having the chance to have their own emotional awareness, emotional maturity. And then, then you've got these outside factors, external factors. So we've got a young person getting married, not being able to mind read, not being able to manage emotional expectations, or being the steady hand when the other person is going through something, and not being able to cope with that. We've seen that quite a lot through our work too. But then you've got the external factors that I've seen, and I'm talking about social media, I think, because of that generation is looking at social media as the go-to for our information.
Yeah.
And then I see things on social media that actually shock me to the core. And we're talking about, a lot of these, you get a group of men talking about how women should act in marriages. I've seen quite a lot of that. I think one of my team called them the red pill men. It's some kind of name they've been given because they're misogynistic in manner, and they're telling men that you should behave in a certain way towards your wife. And then you've got women being exposed to unrealistic ideals of how to be a wife and, you know, what you should say and what you shouldn't say. Is that so much pressure now on young people, you know, trying to make their marriage work?
I think there is a lot of pressure. I think lacking life experience and lacking, like I said, emotional intelligence and the ability to navigate through experiences, difficult experiences and storms, that puts you on the back foot anyway. And then there's, you know, there is the expectation. There's the expectation on men, and I've heard conversations where, you know, there's men saying, well, I expect this from my woman or my wife,
right?
And then there's women saying, well, we expect someone to provide for us.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. I've recently heard a lot that it's for the man to provide, regardless of whether the woman is working.
Yeah, and you know, I've come across that a lot as well. But then I've seen men expect, if they're both working, there's problems or there's kind of friction because they still expect the partner to work, their wife to work, but then do all the things at home, like cook, clean, look after the children. And you know, physically that can be quite demanding and emotionally on a woman. So that can cause a lot of friction as well. But I think the most important thing is, you know, having that expectation set out. You know, what is it that you want? But again, when you're so young, you're not going to have them conversations because all you're going to be thinking about is what car you're going to be hiring out on your wedding, or
true,
you know,
short term.
Is anyone going to be asking you, are you two compatible? You know, what about, you know, how are you going to manage this situation? Finances, you know, how are you going to manage the finances? Because a lot of breakdowns happen because of finances or someone not being able to support the other side. And nowadays there's an expectation, you know, there's social media and there's, you know, I want this, I want that, you know, my holidays and, you know, there's a lifestyle that people expect. And that comes into play as well, the financial side of it. But when you're so young, 21, 22, and I've been to a couple of weddings over the last few months where, you know,
people being so young,
and I'm just thinking, what have they got? What substance is there that's going to keep that going?
So are people having the right conversations then? Because you just mentioned, obviously, you know, that they'll immediately go to, right, what's the I'm trying to think of the word, the optics, right? What are the optics of our wedding? Are all the groomsmen going to be wearing matching waistcoats? And, you know, instead of those kind of questions, Aisha, and I ask you this because I've recently done like a round robin of friends, family, colleagues, and asked them that what would be your top 3 questions to ask your potential partner in order to get an idea of who they are. I don't mean to ask them to ask these questions whether to yay or nay, because by that stage, if they're considering them to be potential partners, then there's something that they are attracted to in that person. But at least going into your marriage with your eyes open, because no one is perfect. And like you said earlier, as long as you can understand each other's weaknesses and strengths, and be warned and be prepared that there's certain things that this person can easily deal with. So some people are great communicators. Like you said, some people don't communicate at all. How would you react if, you know, the finances were an issue? Would you panic? Would you run? Or would you have, you know, sit down and let's deal with it? And you could tell from a lot of the answers that I got back that people were talking about their own experiences, whether they were married 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So some people said, well, we should have asked if they had any liabilities like debt. We never knew that. But, you know, at what point in the meeting somebody, being attracted to somebody, saying yes, and then planning the wedding, at which point in that process do you sit down and say, right, I've got some serious questions that we need to ask each other?
I think when you're young, that don't even, like, those are the
it
questions.
doesn't. Of course it doesn't.
I would think about them now at my age. Those are really important things because, you know, from experience and being alive for so long, you realise that these things come back to bite you, and it's important to see if someone's, you know, what their past is like, what their history is like, you know, how they manage difficulties and finances, and you know, it's important because those are the things that can cause problems later on. But I just don't think these questions being asked. Are there things that we even consider?
I think they need to be, because
absolutely,
from our end of the work is, you know, it's apparent to me when I'm either representing the husband or the wife that there has been a, you know, fundamental breakdown in either communication or understanding of each other. And if they'd have asked certain questions beforehand, and I'm not saying, you know, you can completely be watertight, but you at least have an idea of how the other person functions. And I did get, you know, various responses across the board. It wasn't just the older ones that were saying this. You know, I had people saying, well, ask them, you know, maybe take them out and see how they treat people around them.
Yeah.
You know, that's a big tell, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And, you know, it's funny, one of the youngest people I asked, you know, the response I got from her was, I'd want to see their blocked list on Instagram to see who they're blocking and why they're blocking them.
Yeah.
And for our generation, we're thinking, oh, that sounds quite funny, but it's actually serious for that younger generation.
It's relative, isn't it, for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the questions have to be relative, but I just feel not enough is asked, because marriage, you know, is one of the, I find it can be even harder than, you know, a contract of buying a house. Okay. Everyone thinks that they'll cross their I's, they'll dot their T's, they'll do their searches, they'll visit the neighborhood, they'll speak to the neighbors before they buy a house. But I don't think half as much research is done into potential partners sometimes.
Yeah, I agree.
I think we're going back to our first session of Love is Blind and we're unromantic. But I just think for longevity in a marriage, we have to make sure we've done our homework and we understand the person that we are entering into, with the hope of, you know, a long and, you know, as solid as marriages can be.
Of course, and I think that's quite lacking though now, especially where you see younger people getting married. There's no like due diligence done.
Yeah.
You know, like you would with a house, you'd go check it, you'd get the.
Do you think that's how we're meeting people? Because, you know, back in the day when I got married, it was your parents and your aunties and uncles that would do that due diligence. I remember with when I was before I got married to my husband, there'd be various people coming and say, oh yeah, we know the family and the boy's okay, or so-and-so knows the family and from what we've heard, everything's okay. But because people are meeting their own partners maybe, whether that's face-to-face or online, is there less of that?
I think there's less of that now. I think there's so many different, less traditional ways of meeting where it's not kind of, oh yeah, I know that person, and you know, I think there's less introduction now, and there's more kind of the individual finding their own way and sourcing their own,
which isn't
partners.
A bad thing.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I think there's no other way sometimes to do it.
Absolutely true. Yeah,
especially with the way things are now. Everything's online, everything's, you know, around social media and you know, Instagram and all that. I think things have changed so much, so you have to adapt to your environment.
You do,
and you have to adapt to ways of, because there is still cultural pressure on, especially on women, to get married. You know, I hear it, I've seen it. You know, you go to a wedding and it's the same stuff, it's the same question, it's the same aunties asking the same question, you know, and it's so funny because I think, oh, you know, I really thought we'd moved away from this, but
we can't seem to get rid of that kind of. I saw something really funny the other day where I think it was a young woman was complaining about exactly that. She said, you know, every time I go to the wedding, you know, it's the same aunties all the time who will look at me and say, you're next. Or you should be next. And she was quite funny. She said, I know how to deal with this problem. The next time there's a funeral, I'm going to be looking at my auntie and saying, you're next. Or it should be you next.
So, what? Are you still here?
It is, you know, I was speaking to my daughters about this, and, you know, they've gone on to do some great things, right? They're breaking their own glass ceilings or concrete ceilings.
Absolutely, yeah.
But But there'll always be, and there's people in my family who will say, they're not married yet. And that seems to be the bar that unless you're married, you could go to the moon and back. But for women in particular, if you don't have a husband or a partner,
you haven't quite achieved.
Yeah, you haven't achieved the goal, as it were.
Yeah. I get
that's
that.
Got to change.
Yeah, that definitely has got to change.
Got to change.
I think as women, we're doing some pretty great things.
Yeah, yeah.
And I do accept marriage is an amazing thing. It's a beautiful, part of life. But I think, there's a time and there's a place for everyone.
Yeah.
And like you said about your friend, I was actually at a wedding, a really close family wedding, and was all part of organising it and stuff. And I had family members just totally turn their attention away from the person who's getting married and focus on me and say, "Oh, what about you?" Oh. And I'm like, I think I'm a bit past that I just don't want to have them conversations. I think it's a really personal thing.
How are you supposed to how are you even supposed to answer that?
There's ways in my head that I want to answer.
I know, I'm sure there is. Maybe we can't say that today.
Being polite, I won't answer.
Yeah.
But I just think, are we still doing this?
Are we still doing this? Yeah.
We've progressed a lot. It's one of them things, and I think it's a cultural thing as well, and there's an expectation, and obviously Islamically as well, there's part of being a Muslim is getting married, and it's a big part of our religion, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's hard to come away from that, and I think there's no wrong or right way of seeing it, because everybody's got their own experiences, and there's different generations. But I think there's a right way for you, and figuring that out. And I was thinking while he was saying it, when he was saying there's a lot of youngsters now wanting to do things the halal way. And I really do admire that. I really do admire it. I respect it a lot, because I think, having them kind of principles and values is really important. But it's how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I don't know if it is just principles and values. I think it's a lot of pressure as well to be seen to be doing things the right way. And like you said earlier, honestly, I do feel that a lot of them have not had any life experience. No. They don't know how to deal with, some have gone straight from their parents' home straight into marriage and have never even dealt with a conflict situation because they've been in the parents' home, and, some parents often will, just allow them to live how they want. So they've never had to deal with what do we do now when things aren't going our way, or there's a disagreement, or there's an argument,
Or the mundaneness of marriage.
Even the mundaneness of marriage, absolutely.
Who's taking the bins out?
Yeah.
Who's getting the shopping?
Why am I cooking every day?
Who's going to clean the bathroom?
I'm telling you about my own problems now. I can... you're right. There's got to be... There's got to be an awareness that it's not like you said, after the honeymoon period, and you've got your meher, which I've seen these days. We want a kitten in our marriage gift. What is this trend of having a cat or a kitten? And if my husband to be doesn't get me one, then he's not the perfect husband. It's unrealistic expectations when the actual hard work is in the day to day, like you said.
And then it's not happening. Like you're seeing youngsters wanting to get divorce and things like that. You're seeing that because they haven't got the skills to see it through. They haven't got the, emotional awareness, the self-awareness to be able to understand how to navigate that problem.
Honestly,
they haven't got the life experience.
Sometimes I feel with some of the clients that these are actual children we're dealing with.
Yeah, they are.
I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I mean the actual ages, in terms of they haven't matured enough to deal with the difficulties that day-to-day mundane life brings. And then the answer is just to end the marriage. And then there's often children as a result of that marriage. So, we have to think very, very carefully about what we're entering into. It's not just we can leave it and go. There's going to be some consequences.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for, even though, obviously coming from our culture and having a, Islamic lifestyle, I think there needs to be knowledge around that as well, because saying you want to do things a certain way and, I don't want to get to know someone like this because it needs to be halal. But actually, that is, getting to know someone.
Yeah.
It is part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously there's elements to that where, you kind of guard yourself, but you need to be able to know someone, and, you can get family involved. You don't have to do it.
There's a hadith around this, isn't there? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not a scholar.
Yeah.
But,
There is.
there is a hadith where I think, someone was getting married and he hadn't met or seen the woman and was told to go and see before you enter into marriage. And I think that it carries a lot of weight, getting to know somebody, and getting to know the family, like you said earlier. Because often the families are the safety net if things do go wrong. I've seen this where families will try their best through mediation, through negotiation, as long as there's not any, aggravating factors like violence and things like that. But if it is just a breakdown in communication and misunderstanding, which I often find it is, then, families play a big part. And if they are understanding of each other's situation and needs, then families can play quite a pivotal role in helping that young couple.
Absolutely. I think, having that family support is important, or even having one person that can advocate for you or can kind of help to manage that situation. And I think a lot of the times, especially now, where there's, you're finding your own partner, there's social media, there's online dating apps, so there's not much family involvement, so it's on you then, isn't it, when it breaks down, because actually no one knew that family, no one knew that person. So I can see where culture, there's probably pros and cons to it, because there's many things about our culture and how we do things that are really really valuable, and I can see the value, but again it's about getting that balance, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the work that we do, it and everyone thinks, when I introduce myself as a lawyer that deals with divorces and things, they're like, we don't want to talk to you. We're okay. We don't want to invite anything like that into our marriage. But the reality is sometimes it can just be a matter of time before cracks show, and we help when you get to that situation, but we don't advocate divorce. We don't say, you should get divorced, as soon as there's an issue. There are support agencies out there. There's people like yourself that can talk to people separately or as couples. And how much uptake is there of that, Aisha, in terms of we've always grown up in this country and hearing about couples therapy and couples counselling and marriage. Remember Relate? I don't know if that's still around. I think it is. But it was seen as something that the Asian community didn't partake in. Do you see a change in that? Are people using you more for marriage-related issues?
I think it's still an issue in our community. But I feel like when I have had inquiries or uptake, or other friends and family that have used or wanted marriage counselling and therapy, couples therapy, there's always reluctance on the male part.
Okay.
The women have been very kind of open to it, but there's a reluctance on the male part.
Why is that?
And I think it's the shame and the taboo and not wanting to talk to someone else about your problems, and not even acknowledging that actually you could be the problem. When you haven't got to that point, and when you're so distant from someone, there's a reluctance to want to sort things out in that way, or air it in front of someone else, and that that's still a big problem in our community.
I agree with that. I think you're right. I mean, we deal equally with a lot of men that have relationship breakdowns and things like that, and we try and deal with them from a holistic point of view. So signpost them to people like yourself, and you can see the difference when you've got a husband who will come to you and say, there's a reluctance at first, but because there's a legal problem that needs to be dealt with, they have to open up to us and tell us, what the concerns and the issues are and the legal problems that need fixing. But we can recognize that this person is probably going through something else as well. It's the emotional side of the breakdown of the marriage or the relationship. So we will signpost them to people like yourself and other therapists. And I think probably about 50% at the moment, which is not a bad rate, are taking up that offer of support. It's usually they will prefer a male therapist because they feel that they can relate to them better.
Of course, yeah.
But the change in how, not only in themselves, once they've sought therapy, but also how they deal with the actual problem, the legal problem, the divorce, the separation that they're going through. The change is transformational. They've got more confidence. They're aware more about the impact upon any children of that marriage. They can understand and maybe accept that the relationship is over and there is life after separation and divorce. So it's a really powerful tool, this therapy. Massive.
It's really good to hear that.
Yeah, really is.
And it just brings me back to I was just thinking, I was just having a thought thinking, I mean, it's so powerful when someone can see the you know, the usefulness and the power of therapy and just talking to someone. But imagine the preventative work if it was promoted in the community, in our cultures.
Aisha,
so when those problems are at the beginning of it, and you know, it's just normal to, you know, maybe we should talk to someone about this. We've tried. Why did we get a third party? You know, why? So it could be such a useful tool if it was kind of
and it
more
doesn't
accepted.
just fix it. For me, I've seen couples who have gone to couples therapy, or even one or the other. It doesn't just fix the problems or try to fix or address them, I should say. Fix is a bit of a, you know, general word. But it actually enhances the quality of that marriage.
Yeah.
Because they start learning things about each other or understanding how each other, if someone is behaving in a certain manner, they'll look behind that and saying, what else could be causing it? It might not be me. There might be something else. So they start to understand their husbands or wives or partners.
Yeah.
And I just think, even if you are not having any issues in marriage, I think, you know, just a regular check-in with someone to get that communication and get those conversations started. You might not know what you're missing out in your actual marriage until you try. And then going back to the other sort of 50% of men in particular who don't take up the therapy, you know, you can see that it's because of the embarrassment and the shame, and we don't want to tell anybody that our wife has done this to us or has treated us like this, especially when there's like domestic abuse issues. You know, how can we as a man in our community have put up with this kind of abuse, whether it's emotional, you know, whether it's financial, if the wife is the higher earning partner. And it is a question of shame and embarrassment, and then they won't take up that offer of therapy.
And that's the main crux of it, isn't it? Not being able to take it up because of the shame and the embarrassment of it. And I'm a man, you know, and you know, men don't cry. Yeah.
This is true, and they're taught not to, and that's something I don't think we discussed it last time, but it's another subject maybe for another day. But I feel that the dynamics of marriage, especially for younger men, are really influenced by their mothers.
You just took words out of my mouth. Yeah,
I see this a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a big problem as well. In a lot of the breakdowns of marriage.
It really is. I shock people when they ask me what are the main reasons, and honestly, overwhelming it can be the influence of, you know, parents, in particular the mother, in terms of how you should be treating your wife.
And how much control they have over that marriage.
Yeah, this is true.
And how much control they want to have over that marriage.
Yeah.
And almost like they've got a right to that control, you know. And I think it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because as a son, you're kind of torn between, you know, the loyalties to your mum. So for me, it's like, why would you put someone in that position? Why would you? Because at one point you were someone's wife. You were married to.
That's the bit
you were a daughter-in-law. You know, you was.
I don't get that, Aisha. And particularly in terms of certain examples that come to my mind. Obviously, the clients, and I can't disclose, but the mother-in-law will have been a victim of this same kind of abuse from her own mother-in-law. Why does that perpetuate?
I think it's maybe learnt behaviour, and it's seen as, if someone hasn't stood up and said that was wrong, what happened to you, how do you know it's wrong? How do you know that?
Wow, light bulb moment there.
Yeah, how do you know that's not how things should be? Well, it happened to me.
So they think it's normal.
They normalise it. Well,
even though they
I went through it,
had a lot of pain through it.
Yeah, I think sometimes that's how generational trauma becomes generational trauma, because we repeat the cycles, because we've never had the opportunity to break that cycle.
Okay.
No one said, oh, actually, that was awful what happened to you.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. No one's give you the opportunity to heal.
That's a good point, that. Yeah.
And we just repeat things, don't we? We repeat cycles of behaviour.
Yeah. So do we need specific therapy for mother-in-laws, do you think? Is there a line of work there?
Absolutely, yeah.
Honestly, we laugh about it, but
yeah.
If they have been subjected to this themselves, then there is a real need. There's a real trauma.
But sometimes they don't even know, because I've heard my aunties who obviously, my dad's age and stuff, say, well, it happens, doesn't it?
So that's the thing that makes it okay.
Doesn't it?
Right, yeah.
Oh, it happens. And I'm like, no, it shouldn't happen.
Happen.
Can you see, sometimes they were victims too, but because someone above them has said, oh, that's normal, it happens.
Yeah.
I
see that.
Some of the stories I've heard from family members, and I just think, one day I said to my sister, she looked at me and we both laughed, because she looked at me like, you would never let anyone do that. And we just looked at each other like, no, I wouldn't. But we've been brought up in a way where, we know that's not acceptable. And equally, how to treat someone, how to treat a husband, how to treat your wife, just how to treat a person, really.
How to treat a person. I see that conflict, though, especially if we go back to the example of the husband who's being influenced by mum, but maybe sort of born and raised in this country and sees friends and colleagues who are not from that community having different kind of relationships with their wives, and then there's the conflict. And I think that's where you get breakdowns of marriage, breakdowns of your own mental health, because you're trying to cope with different dynamics, I think, and trying to reconcile the two. And often it doesn't match, doesn't work.
No, and it can be really draining.
Yeah.
And almost like living a double life, and you're not being able to be true to yourself.
Yeah.
You can't really do what you want, and that creates such internal conflict, which can lead to stress and burnout and a breakdown in communication, and it can be really difficult to have to manage them dynamics.
Yeah, of course. And I think for me then is the aftermath, which is you have children who are then being pulled between two parents, vying for attentions, and often then being influenced in their own right about the other parent. And I'm not a therapist, but I can still see that in the future, when these young children are growing up, they already are at a disadvantage about not being able to manage or being allowed to manage their own emotions, because they've been told, oh, your dad's bad, or your mum is evil, and you're not going to go there today because this is what happened last time, or whatever it is. And then, so you're just adding, more onto this young person to try and manage. And I think it's too much.
Massively too much. You're causing a lot of long-term damage.
Yeah.
And affecting their ability to cope with, something that does happen.
Yeah.
It's part of life, is breakdown of relationships.
I think that's the key, Aisha, actually, what you just said. We've never discussed that before, but maybe an expectation that you're going to have these moments. It's not all going to be,
perfect.
Roses and flowers and perfumes and gifts and all that kind of thing. And maybe some more awareness and work needs to be done about that, and how to manage, those kind of moments.
Yeah, and just the awareness of this can happen.
Yeah.
But coming back to the children, I've seen lots of situations where children are used as little kind of pawns in the fight.
Yeah, of course.
And that really damages them.
Yeah.
But then I've seen amazing examples where, you know, both parents have split, but for the children, they're amicable, they're very, you know, they know how
it works. Successful co-parenting.
Yeah.
It actually really works.
But when there's bitterness and anger and you've not worked through that, and there's, you know, financial things like, you know, that's my house, I want that part, that part of the business is mine, or they owe me this, and, you know, that can turn to long-term feuds and big family feuds as well.
Yeah.
And then the kids are kind of torn between mum and dad, and then, you know, I think when you're so angry at your partner, you're not seeing the damage that you're doing to that child, and actually, you know, they should be protected in all that.
They should, you're right. And we do often encourage couples that are separating where there's finances involved to try and deal with the children's arrangements first. So there's none of that, you know, toxicity and conflict about the finances. So the children are regarded in their own right. Because that kind of damage is lasting, and it takes a lot to unpick.
And what are your children learning of how parents deal with conflict with each other? Yeah. Aggressively, painfully. You know, you're not role modelling the right behaviour, are you? They're seeing, oh, this is how you deal with it, anger, you deal with it by, you know, defaming the other person and, you know, saying bad things about the other person. This is what they learn. And, you know, as children, it's hard to hear either parent say something bad about, because they've got...
It really is. It really is.
You know...
Such a good point you make. And I often find that people don't realise that children, even if you're separating and you've had a breakdown, the children, you're the whole world to your children. And they're already coping with you not liking each other. But then if you're then going to continue to say that person's a bad person, children want to love each parent equally, assuming everything's good. And you're introducing a new element to them to make the other parent a bad person. And it's hard.
Yeah, and you see some really poor examples of that happening. And then, you know, I've seen some really, really good examples. I've got a family member, and she went through a really difficult time. And, you know, they ended up divorcing, and it wasn't nice. But what I see of her, she's got the children, but even though he continues to be very difficult and very abrasive and not very nice, she is just, you know, she's just so lovely with the kids, from trying to build relationships, sometimes even kind of, you know, building when he's not able to do something, making sure that they can go do that with him, you know, building them bridges and filling that gap in for him, even though it could be argued that he doesn't deserve it, but she does it for the children. And you can see how they've got a really healthy relationship with their mum and their dad, because she's managed to do it so well. And you know, every time I think of a good example of that, I just think, wow, that's a really great example. Considering what she's been through as well with him, because it was some horrible situations. And she'll always say to me, I'm doing it for the kids because I don't want them to grow up and say, Mum used to say this about our dad, and Mum, you never let me do this with Dad. She said if they grow up and see what their dad is for themselves, either way, whether they have a good relationship or a negative, it'll be on their grounds, it'll be their choice, not what I've interjected.
And it's true. And the children thrive in that environment. You know, I've seen examples where parents have separated, remarried, had children with their new partners, but still successfully co-parent that joint child.
Yeah.
And that child thrives because it now has 4 good parents.
Yeah.
Rather than 2 who, you know, are feeding that child information that is in conflict with its natural psyche, because it's my mom, it's my dad. So she sounds like she's, you know, got the children's interests at heart, which is very important, because they're growing into, you know, young people, young adults, and you don't want them to have to carry any of that with them.
Yeah, and it does. You know, I've had someone that comes to mind that had this young adult in therapy for quite a while, who was there because of the parents split up when she was younger, and she's got so much trauma from that because she'd go see her dad, and dad was always saying really awful things about mum, and then she'd go see mum who'd moved on, and mum was always saying really bad things about. But for that child, mum and dad were both equal. But now, you know, what I saw was, you know, an inability to create attachments, security, massive anxiety, self-blame, you know, and those things. And you know, that person's an adult now, and they've carried that. You know, the parents got divorced when I think probably about 12. So it's fascinating to see how your whole life can just be so, you know.
And I think our next podcast is about parenting. So that would be really interesting to pick up on that. So I think we've got about a minute left. So I would ask you, Aisha, is what would be your top 3 points about someone who's thinking of going into a marriage or at the early stages of their marriage in terms of either red flags or things that you really need to sort of consider before you get married?
I think the most important thing is understanding yourself, knowing who you are and what it is you want out of this marriage, and knowing what you want for someone else as well, because you know you're going to be a part of someone else's life.
Of course,
you know, what you want for yourself, you should want for the other person as well. So are you able to give that back? Are you able to give emotional intelligence? And are you able to be self-aware around your own behaviour? Are you able to role model, you know, being a partner or offering, you know, love and care? And are you ready for that? I think that's the most important thing. And what is your expectation? And when you do meet someone, be honest and open about that expectation. You know, do your expectations match? You know, where do you see things? Who, you know, what would you like your marriage to look like? How, you know, even little things like, you know, finances, and well, they're not little things, but you know, looking at who's expected to provide this, and who, you know, just things like that.
The minutiae of it all.
Because sometimes they're the unsaid things, and they're the actually the biggest problems, you know, not understanding what someone's role is or what your expectation is of that person. And then having inferred expectations, well, they should know. How?
I hear that so much, why don't I know?
Well, she should know. I shouldn't have had to say that. You should have known that.
Like you've got a crystal ball or your mind reader.
That's it. And it's so funny. It always makes me laugh internally when I hear it. I'm like, why do people think that other people can read their minds?
I don't know. I mean, but I think for me, what I would say, given our work and our experience with clients in these situations, is communication. And you've alluded to that so many times during this conversation, is that communication is the key. And if you find it hard to communicate, maybe get some help to facilitate that communication. Because the single most thing that sticks out to me in any application for divorce is the breakdown in communication between the two parties.
And, you know, I learned how to communicate through therapy.
I think you mentioned that in your last podcast, didn't you? I remember that.
Because I had to look at myself. My part in things. It's easy to say, oh, so-and-so's done this and that's happened. Okay, but what's your part? What could have you done to help yourself? Oh, God,
some accountability.
I can communicate better. I could do this better. You know, so enhancing your own skills, and because if you haven't got it, you can't expect other people.
That's such a good point. It's a great point. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so.
Well, we'll end it on that, and we will pick up in our next conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you again for your time. Honestly, I think I said this last time, but I feel like I've had a therapy session every time I speak to Aisha. But if there's any other topics that anybody wants us to discuss and have a chat about, let us know. Contact us at SKB Law, or you can contact Aisha at aishatherapy.com. There you go. Thank you.